The Galactic Academy stood in slow orbit above a pale blue gas giant, its silver rings glowing softly as distant stars passed behind it. Inside the Academy, one of the largest lecture halls was filled to capacity. Rows of seats curved upward like terraces, each occupied by students from dozens of different worlds. Some were tall and thin, others short and round, some covered in fur, scales, or smooth glassy skin. They all shared the same quiet mood, patience mixed with boredom. This class had a reputation. At the center of the hall, a wide holographic platform hovered above the floor. Symbols, diagrams, and flowing lines of light filled the air above it. These images represented the ancient problem of network collapse, a flaw buried deep inside the systems that connected the galaxy. Every jump gate, energy relay, and data corridor relied on those systems. And for 1,000 years, no one had truly fixed the flaw. Professor Halloran floated near the platform, supported by a faint field of light. His species had no legs, only long tendrils that moved slowly as he spoke. His voice echoed calmly through the hall. "As you know," he said, "this instability emerges when the network reaches critical density. All known models fail beyond this threshold. This has been proven repeatedly over centuries." Many students nodded. Some did not bother looking up. This lecture was always the same. The problem was presented, the known theories were reviewed, and the conclusion never changed. Unsolvable. Unavoidable. A limit of reality itself. In the middle rows sat a human named Sam Carter. Sam looked very ordinary by human standards. He had short brown hair, plain clothes, and a simple tablet resting on his knee. Compared to the others, he seemed small and fragile. Earth gravity had shaped him, but compared to many species in the room, Earth was considered a death world. Storms, earthquakes, diseases, predators, and constant environmental stress had shaped human evolution. Still, Sam did not look dangerous. He just looked focused. While others listened out of habit, Sam actually wrote things down. The diagrams above the platform shifted, showing a massive web of nodes and connections. Some lines glowed brightly, others flickered. "This collapse," Professor Halloran continued, "does not happen often, but when it does, recovery requires centuries. Entire regions of space can be isolated. Trade fails. Communication slows. This is why we teach this problem, even though it has no solution." A student near the front let out a soft sound of agreement. Another checked their wrist display. A few quietly recorded the lecture, planning to review it later only because it would be on the exam. Sam frowned slightly. He zoomed in on one of the diagrams on his tablet. The model was clean. Too clean. Every node was identical. Every connection behaved perfectly until it suddenly failed all at once. That felt strange. On Earth, Sam had studied systems engineering before joining the interstellar program. Power grids, traffic systems, supply chains. None of them worked like this. None of them were perfect. They failed all the time but rarely all at once. Professor Halloran gestured, and the hologram shifted to a historical record. Dates scrolled by, each marking a failed attempt to solve the problem. "For 1,000 standard cycles," the professor said, "the greatest minds of the galaxy have refined these models. They have removed inefficiencies. They have eliminated randomness. And yet, the collapse remains." Sam paused his notes. Eliminated randomness. That line stuck in his head. The professor continued, explaining how ancient civilizations once believed the collapse was caused by faulty materials, then by poor energy flow, then by errors in mathematics. Each theory had been tested. Each had failed. "To accept this limitation," Professor Halloran said, "is not defeat. It is wisdom." That was when Sam leaned back slightly in his seat. Wisdom, he thought, or habit? Around him, students accepted the words easily. To them, the problem was like gravity or time. It existed. It could be studied but not changed. Sam glanced around the hall. He noticed how carefully structured everything was. The academy itself ran on systems designed to avoid failure at all costs. Backup systems for backup systems. Smooth surfaces. Silent machinery. Everything was built to prevent mistakes. Earth was not like that. On Earth, mistakes were common. Systems broke. People adapted. When one part failed, another part took over, often in messy and imperfect ways. Humans did not wait for perfect designs. They built things that could survive being wrong. Professor Halloran finished the main presentation and allowed the hologram to settle into a static image. "This concludes today's overview," he said. "Next session, we will review the most recent failed model proposed by the Lauren Collective." A low murmur moved through the hall. Chairs shifted. Some students prepared to leave. Sam hesitated. He looked again at the diagram, at the clean lines, at the identical nodes. He raised his hand. The motion was small but noticeable. Professor Halloran paused. His tendrils stilled as his attention shifted. Yes, the professor said slowly. The human student. Sam Carter. Several heads turned. A few students leaned forward with mild curiosity. Humans were still rare here. Sam stood, feeling the familiar weight of attention. He kept his voice steady. I don't mean to interrupt, he said, but I have a question about the model. Professor Halloran tilted slightly. Proceed. Sam took a breath. Why does the model assume the system never partially fails? A faint ripple passed through the room. Professor Halloran responded carefully. Partial failure introduces instability. The goal is to prevent any failure. Sam nodded. I understand that. But in the model, when one node fails, everything collapses. On Earth, we usually design systems to fail in small pieces instead of all at once. Silence followed. The professor's tendrils moved again, slower this time. That approach was considered inefficient, he said. Allowing failure reduces optimal performance. Sam thought of blackouts that rerouted power, of servers that dropped traffic to survive overload, of bridges designed to bend instead of snap. Sometimes, Sam said, choosing his words simply, efficiency isn't the most important thing. Survival is. The room grew quieter. No one spoke for several long seconds. Professor Halloran finally replied, This is beyond the scope of today's lecture. Sam nodded. Understood. He sat back down. The class ended soon after. Students filed out, talking softly. Some dismissed the exchange as human misunderstanding. Others felt a faint unease they could not name. Professor Halloran remained near the platform long after the hall emptied. The hologram still glowed faintly, showing the perfect, fragile system. For the first time in many cycles, the ancient problem did not feel distant. It felt incomplete. And Sam Carter walked back to his quarters, unaware that he had just asked the question no one else had thought to ask in 1,000 years. The next session at the Galactic Academy began quietly, almost too quietly. The large hall was filled with students as usual from worlds far and near. Some hovered above the seats, using their natural levitation, while others settled firmly on the polished floor. The walls reflected soft light from the artificial sun above, and the hum of energy from the network that kept the academy alive was almost hypnotic. Professor Lyran stood at the front, a tall, thin alien with skin like pale silver glass. He traced lines in the air, creating complex curves and loops of energy that floated above the platform. The holographic diagram of the galactic network shimmered like liquid light. For centuries, Professor Lyran said, we have assumed ideal conditions. Each node functions perfectly. Each connection carries exactly the intended flow. Under these assumptions, failure is impossible. Yet the collapse occurs. Even the slightest deviation is fatal to the system. Students murmured in agreement. Many nodded as though this was obvious. The network had always been treated like a living, fragile organism. It was sacred in its perfection. Sam Carter sat quietly in the middle row, leaning slightly forward. His tablet was open, and he scrolled through simulations of the network, comparing each to what he had seen on Earth. The alien models were flawless, precise, and smooth. The energy flow was always perfect. Nodes never faltered. Sam frowned. Back home, nothing ever worked like that. Not power grids, not communication networks, not even water systems. Systems broke constantly, but humans had learned to expect it. They built redundancy, backup pathways, and emergency fixes into everything. They did not wait for perfection. They adapted. A low hum of discussion began to rise in the hall as some students whispered to each other. Their voices were alien, strange in tone, but the words were translated in Sam's mind. They debated fractions of flow, theoretical resistance, and error probabilities. Sam noticed something simple, something no one else seemed to see. The models assumed that nothing ever went wrong. Not one node failed. Not one connection lagged. Not one tiny error occurred. His mind ran through Earth's systems again. Bridges bent under too much weight but didn't fall. Pipelines cracked and valves diverted pressure. Computers slowed but didn't crash completely. Systems adapted because humans designed them to expect mistakes, not to pretend mistakes did not exist. He raised his hand. The classroom immediately went quiet. Alien students turned to look at him. Some tilted their heads with curiosity. Humans were still rare in the academy. A few professors exchanged cautious glances. Yes. Professor Lyran asked, his voice calm but careful. Sam stood, keeping his tone even. I was thinking, he said slowly, why do we treat failure as impossible? What if the system is designed to expect mistakes instead of denying them? A ripple ran through the room. Some students whispered to each other, barely audible. They clearly had not considered this. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few alien species even recoiled slightly, as though Sam's suggestion was physically unpleasant. Professor Lyron's long arms floated upward. Explain yourself, human? Sam looked at the holographic model. The lines shimmered and pulsed with smooth energy. All the nodes are identical, he said. All the connections are perfect. But if a single node fails, the entire network collapses. On Earth, systems are designed to fail in parts, not as a whole. We accept that individual pieces may break and the system adapts. It survives even if it is less than perfect. A murmur ran through the lecture hall. Some students gasped in their way or maybe just expressed disbelief. Sam noticed their shocked expressions but did not falter. Professor Lyron tilted slightly. Efficiency is our goal. Failure reduces efficiency. Allowing failure would weaken the network. Sam shook his head slightly. Sometimes efficiency isn't the most important thing. Survival is. If the network collapses completely, it doesn't matter how efficient it was when it worked perfectly. If parts can fail without bringing down the whole, it continues. The classroom was silent. Even the humming energy seemed to pause for a moment. Professor Lyron's long, delicate fingers floated over the diagrams, adjusting a few lines. You propose deliberate imperfection? Yes, Sam said simply. Not random chaos. Controlled imperfection. Backup nodes, redundancy, ways to absorb mistakes. Small failures that don't become total failures. Some students began muttering again, cautiously. They were thinking aloud about what Sam had said. One whispered, that would ruin the simulations. Another said, it is unorthodox, impossible in theory. But Sam kept his calm. In his mind he ran through examples of Earth systems. A bridge that bent instead of snapping. A dam that released pressure through small valves. A computer system that slowed under heavy load instead of shutting down. Each of these failures made the system stronger in the long run. Professor Lyron floated silently for a moment, his pale face reflecting the light. Finally he spoke. This is not within the known parameters. Our models assume uniformity. Uniformity guarantees maximum efficiency. You suggest reducing efficiency deliberately. Not reducing efficiency, Sam said. Trading maximum efficiency for stability. Predictable failure. Survival. The professor's eyes narrowed. Have you tested this idea? Sam nodded. I tried a small simulation during my independent studies. It worked. Not perfectly, but the network continued to function even when several nodes failed at once. The system adapted instead of collapsing. The lecture hall was quiet again more than before. Alien students stared at Sam in disbelief, some shaking their heads slowly. They had studied these problems for lifetimes, and yet a single human had just questioned centuries of theory. Professor Lyron's voice was calm but carried a hint of tension. We have never allowed failure in our calculations. We consider it a flaw in logic. Maybe it is not a flaw, Sam replied. Maybe it's reality. A young alien student with 4 arms whispered. He is saying the network is too perfect. That's dangerous thinking. Sam smiled faintly. Not dangerous. Practical. For the rest of the class, discussion continued. The professor returned to theoretical calculations, but Sam had already made his point. The other students debated quietly among themselves. Some tried to justify the current models. Others couldn't stop thinking about Sam's idea. By the time the session ended, the hall was filled with a mix of tension and curiosity. Students filed out, talking in low voices. Sam gathered his tablet and notes, moving slowly through the emptying rows. Some glanced at him with cautious admiration. Professor Lyron remained near the holographic platform. He did not speak, but his long fingers traced the shimmering lines again. The idea of deliberate imperfection refused to leave his mind. Sam stepped out of the lecture hall, walking through the corridors of the academy. The walls gleamed faintly under the artificial sunlight. Students passed, most still murmuring about the human idea and its strange simplicity. In his quarters later, Sam opened his tablet and ran simulations again. He altered parameters slightly. One node would fail. Another would lag. Small, controlled disruptions. In every case, the network adapted. The collapse slowed, then stopped entirely. The next day, the lecture hall was filled again, but a different energy hung in the air. The usual hum of conversation was quieter, slower, as if the students were weighing ideas too big for words. Whispers moved through the rows. Some students glanced at Sam Carter as he entered, remembering his question from the previous session. A few even nodded slightly, unsure why. At the front, Professor Howren waited by the floating holographic platform. His tendrils twitched in the pale light. He projected the network diagram again, its lines gleaming like threads of silver and blue. Students watched, but no one spoke. The problem had been described countless times, yet something felt different today. Sam stepped to the front when the professor nodded at him. He held his tablet with calm confidence. His fingers moved over the screen, opening a simulation he had built overnight. It was simple, nothing flashy. Red nodes, blue nodes, connections that pulsed lightly with energy. Sam had labeled them plainly with small, clear symbols. "I want to try something," Sam said, his voice steady. "I built a simple model based on redundancy and feedback. It lets the network correct itself if small failures happen. It's not perfect, but it keeps the system running." The professors exchanged glances. Some leaned closer to see the simulation. None spoke at first. Sam touched the first node on his tablet. It flickered and failed. Instantly, a backup node activated. The energy rerouted smoothly. Another node failed. Another backup kicked in. The network remained stable. He looked up and explained clearly using simple words. "See, when a node fails, the system adapts. It doesn't collapse. The energy moves through other connections. Feedback loops detect issues and redirect flow automatically. The network is self-correcting. Failures are small, controlled. The system survives." The classroom went quiet. Not a whisper. Not a movement. Every pair of eyes was on the floating hologram. The lines above shimmered and adjusted on their own, glowing steadily. The network that had always been fragile now appeared alive, moving and adjusting as if it could think. Professor Hallren's tendrils froze. He floated closer to the display, his face pale with surprise. "Impossible," he whispered. The words were soft, but every student heard. Sam continued calmly. "It's not magic. It's simple design. Redundancy, feedback, tolerance for mistakes. That's all it needs. The network adapts like it should." Another professor, a taller one with four-jointed arms, leaned forward. "You claim to solve what has lasted 1,000 cycles of study, in one session?" Sam nodded. "I'm not saying it's final. There's still refinement. But the principle works. The network stabilizes instantly in simulation." He tapped his tablet again. The holographic network shimmered and pulsed, now glowing in bright, even light. Failures continued to occur in small, random areas. Each time, the network absorbed them, rerouted energy, and returned to balance. Students gasped softly. Some had never seen a network behave like this before. A young alien scholar whispered, It should not survive that." Sam smiled faintly. "It survives because it expects failure." Professor Hallren's tendrils twitched again. He floated closer to the hologram, almost inspecting it like a delicate machine. This contradicts centuries of theory. Models, calculations, simulations, all fail when any node falters. Yet your system stabilizes. How? "Feedback loops," Sam said. "They detect small problems and act immediately. Redundant nodes replace failing ones. Controlled failures prevent total collapse. It's not about perfect nodes. It's about flexible systems." The classroom remained silent except for the faint hum of the holographic energy. Some students were staring at the display with wide eyes. Others whispered softly, trying to understand. Professor Howren slowly moved back. His tendrils shook slightly, a sign of tension in his species. "You have simplified something thought to be impossible." Sam nodded. "I simplified it to what works in real life. The galaxy has been searching for perfection, but life isn't perfect. Systems that survive must handle imperfection. That's all." Another professor, older and with deep amber skin, spoke next. "But you've done it in less than an hour. Entire civilizations have studied this problem for lifetimes. How can a human—" He stopped, shaking his head. I do not understand." Sam shrugged lightly. "Maybe it's because humans are used to living with failure. We designed to survive mistakes, not avoid them completely. Maybe it's just perspective." There was a pause. The holographic network continued its quiet dance, glowing, adjusting, surviving small failures with ease. Professor Howren cleared his throat. "We need to verify this. The simulation may be flawed. Your human logic may have missed something." "I already ran multiple simulations," Sam said. It works the same each time. The system stabilizes every time as long as failures are controlled and small. Another student leaned forward. But, if this is true, it changes everything. Our models, our calculations, our entire approach. Her voice trailed off. Yes, Sam said simply. It changes everything. The professor floated back slightly, his long arms folding. Then, the problem that has lasted 1,000 years may have been waiting for a different kind of mind. A mind that does not fear imperfection. Sam looked at the glowing network above the platform. It was quiet now, stable, even elegant in its simplicity. He felt calm. On Earth, he had seen many systems fail and survive. He had learned that imperfection could be an advantage. The lecture hall remained filled with tension and awe. No one moved for several long moments. Then the murmur of whispers began. Students were no longer bored. They were discussing, debating, questioning. Something had shifted. Professor Howren finally spoke again, his voice low and steady. Record everything. Document this. Every simulation, every node, every response. The archives must reflect this. Yes, Professor, Sam said quietly. As the session ended, students filed out slowly. Some glanced at Sam with awe. Others still shook their heads in disbelief. The professors lingered near the hologram, their eyes fixed on the network that had stabilized against all previous understanding. Sam gathered his tablet and walked out of the hall. He was calm. He had only shared what he knew. To him it was obvious. The galaxy had been trying to force perfection for centuries, and perfection had failed. Outside, the corridors of the academy were quiet, the artificial sun casting pale light across the polished floors. Sam walked past clusters of students discussing the model in low voices. Some wondered if this human had changed the rules forever. Others simply feared what it might mean. In his quarters, Sam ran the simulation again. This time he added more nodes, more connections, more potential failures. Each time, the network adapted, rerouted energy, and stabilized. The failure that had haunted the galaxy for 1,000 years could now be controlled. Not perfectly, but well enough to survive. Sam leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the stars. He did not feel pride that he felt something simpler. Understanding, the network could survive because it could fail, and that had always been the way on Earth. Life survived by adapting. Machines could do the same. And in the vast, silent halls of the academy, for the first time in a millennium, a centuries-old problem seemed solvable. The day after Sam's demonstration, the lecture hall was quiet in an unusual way. Students whispered to each other as they entered, but their voices were low, almost nervous. The professors arrived first, moving through the corridors with measured steps, though their usual calm seemed fractured. In his quarters, Sam had finished reviewing his simulation one more time. He had tweaked a few nodes, tested different failure points, and run the feedback loops again. Each time, the network stabilized exactly as it had the day before. For him, it was simple and logical. He didn't understand why everyone seemed tense. Survival, adaptation, redundancy, this was how the universe worked on Earth. Yet in the faculty lounge, the tension was almost tangible. Professor Howren sat at a polished table, his tendrils wrapped tightly around the edge. Professor Lyron stood nearby, pacing slowly, silver arms glinting in the soft light. Even the older, amber-skinned professor, who usually remained composed in all matters, seemed disturbed. They cannot be this effective, Howren muttered, more to himself than anyone else. A single human, in one session, stabilizes the network that has eluded the greatest minds for centuries. How is that possible? Lyron's head tilted slightly. It is not just possible, Howren. It has happened. The simulation shows it clearly. We witnessed it with our own eyes. Every node, every loop, adapted to failure perfectly. Instantly. Howren shook his head. The calculations, they do not account for this. Every model assumes perfection is required. Yet the human operates on a different principle. He assumes imperfection. An older professor finally spoke, his voice low and careful. If he thinks this way, what else might humans consider simple that we see as impossible? What else have they already done without us noticing? Lyron froze. His translucent skin seemed to shimmer slightly, a sign of agitation in his species. You mean, other humans could solve centuries-old problems we haven't even imagined? Not even imagine, Howren said. They may see them as trivial. This is dangerous, in ways we cannot control. Back in the hall, Sam noticed the tension too. As he packed his tablet and notes, he glanced around. Students whispered and exchanged puzzled looks. Some professors were still hovering near the holographic platform, their long fingers tracing lines nervously. Sam tilted his head. He didn't understand their worry. To him, the network was behaving exactly as it should. Isn't this just practical? He thought. It's just common sense. But to the faculty, common sense from a human was unsettling. They had spent centuries treating failure as a theoretical impossibility. They had built entire civilizations around the idea of perfection. And here was a human casually ignoring that rule and succeeding anyway. In the faculty lounge, discussions became more urgent. This cannot be repeated in our models, one professor said. If it is, we will have to rethink everything. What do you mean rethink? Lyran asked. The human solution works. The simulation is stable. The network can survive. Isn't that what we wanted? Yes, Halloran replied slowly, but we wanted it in a controlled, predictable way. Not like this. This method does not fit our theory. It contradicts centuries of calculation. It undermines our understanding of what is possible. The other professors murmured agreement, each grappling with the implications. Some were excited. Some were anxious. All were unsettled. Meanwhile, Sam walked through the academy corridors. He passed clusters of students talking in low voices. He could hear bits of their conversation. Did you see that? A tall student whispered. He actually solved it. The network didn't collapse. I know, another said. But why are the professors so tense? Sam shook his head. To him, the answer was simple. They're worried about what humans can do. He smiled faintly to himself. The thought was almost humorous. On Earth, humans solved impossible problems every day, not by following perfect theory, but by surviving, improvising, and adapting. That was what they did best. The professors continued their private meetings. Each raised a new concern, quietly in measured voices. If humans approach every problem like this, one said, they could destabilize entire systems simply by existing. They do not fear failure. They do not follow our rules. What if they apply this thinking elsewhere? Then we will have to observe carefully, another replied. We cannot predict the outcomes. A third professor added, we may need to adjust the academy's curriculum. They cannot teach humans the same way. Our assumptions no longer hold. In his quarters, Sam reviewed the simulation one last time before dinner. He introduced a minor disturbance, a small random failure in the network. Once again, the system adjusted perfectly, rerouted energy, and maintained stability. It was exactly as it had been yesterday. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly, filled with challenges and uncertainty. On Earth, he had survived storms, power outages, and dangerous situations. He had always solved problems by expecting imperfection, by building systems that could adapt. That principle worked here too. He didn't realize the weight of what he had done. The professors were still unsettled. Some feared that one human mind could shift the balance of knowledge in ways they could not control. Others worried that the human approach, if applied widely, might make centuries of careful planning obsolete. But Sam remained calm. To him, the solution was simple. Accept that mistakes happen. Prepare for them. Adapt. Survive. That was all. In the hallways, students discussed quietly. I've never seen a solution like that before, one whispered. He made it look easy. Yes, another replied. It's terrifying how simple it seems. For the professors, terror and admiration were nearly the same feeling. They had spent lifetimes following rules that worked only in theory. And here was a human showing them a reality that had never existed in their calculations. In the quiet of the academy that evening, the network continued to hum softly. The holographic projections of the system were stable, resilient, and adaptive. Sam did not know it, but every professor in the academy spent the night reconsidering centuries of theory. The galaxy had always valued perfection, efficiency, and predictability. Humans valued survival, flexibility, and resilience. And that difference, simple, obvious, natural, was changing everything. Sam smiled to himself, unaware of the quiet panic he had caused. He had only applied what he knew best. And for the professors, the implications were terrifying. For the first time in a millennium, the idea that humans might not just survive, but excel, without following centuries of tradition filled the academy with unease. The day after the demonstration, the academy was unusually busy. Not with students but with professors. The halls hummed with quiet urgency. Every floor, every corridor seemed to carry a nervous energy. The solution Sam Carter had presented was no longer just a lecture exercise. It had become the center of debate, reflection, and careful study. In the main archive hall, Professor Halloran and Professor Lyran moved slowly between floating data screens. They projected the network simulation over and over, examining each node, each feedback loop, each small failure and recovery. Every time the system stabilized, the professors exchanged tense glances. "We must record every detail," Halloran said, his tendrils flicking nervously. "Every simulation, every adjustment he made, every reaction of the network. It is unlike anything we have ever seen." Lyran nodded, his head tilting. "For generations we have assumed perfection as the only path. We taught the students that failure was the enemy. And now, one human has shown us otherwise." In the middle of the academy, students moved through the corridors in subdued excitement. Sam walked among them carrying his tablet. He passed groups of aliens who glanced at him with curiosity, some with admiration, some with lingering suspicion. He smiled faintly but did not stop. Back in the archive, Halloran sighed. "We have to admit it. The humans' method works. Not only works, it surpasses every theory we have built over centuries." Lyran's voice was quiet but intense. "It is simple. Redundancy, feedback, controlled failure, flexibility, survival. All things we ignored because we chased perfection." Halloran nodded. "And yet, it is terrifying. If humans approach every problem this way, what else might they solve that we think impossible?" Meanwhile, Sam sat quietly in his quarters. He was reviewing the latest data from his simulation. The network responded perfectly to small failures. Each disruption was absorbed. Each energy flow redirected. The system no longer risked collapse. It was resilient, adaptive, alive. He leaned back and thought about Earth. The storms, the earthquakes, the floods, the blackouts, the constant challenges his people faced, they had all taught him the same lesson. Systems must survive mistakes. Life survives because it adapts, not because it avoids failure. A soft knock came at his door. It was Professor Lyran. "May I come in?" Lyran asked. Sam nodded. "Sure." Lyran stepped inside, moving carefully so as not to bump any of the glowing screens. "Sam," he said quietly, "we have been reviewing your simulations. The professors, we are recording everything. The Academy archives will be updated for the first time in generations. Your method will be preserved." Sam looked at him, confused. "I'm just using what I know from back home. I don't understand why it's such a big deal." Lyran smiled faintly. "It is a big deal. The galaxy has searched for perfection for thousands of cycles. Every civilization, every academy, every great mind has studied this problem. And you, in one day, have solved it in a way no one else could imagine." Sam shrugged. "It just makes sense to me. Systems survive mistakes. People survive mistakes. Why wouldn't networks do the same?" Lyran shook his head slowly. "It is simple and yet it is revolutionary. We always assumed perfection was necessary. Humans, you survive imperfection daily. That is the difference." Sam looked down at his tablet. "So, it's not about being smarter or faster. Just, prepared?" "Yes," Lyran said. "Prepared, flexible, adaptable. You don't fear failure, Sam. You use it. That is why this worked when our models always failed." Over the next few days the Academy moved quickly. Every lecture, every class, every student project was examined. The simulation Sam had built became the new reference. Professors discussed the method in hushed tones, debating how to incorporate the principle of controlled failure into other networks, systems, and even learning models. Some were uneasy. Some were amazed. Many were both. One senior professor, standing before a group of colleagues in the main hall, spoke plainly. "We have searched for perfection for centuries. But humans, they survive imperfection. And that is why they succeed where we fail. That is the difference. It is not strength or intelligence alone. It is resilience, adaptability, and perspective." The statement echoed quietly in the hall. Everyone felt its weight. They had been studying the wrong goal for generations. The galaxy valued efficiency and flawless design. Humans valued survival, adjustment, and improvisation. Sam watched from a distance as students experimented with the simulation. He noticed how easily they adapted his simple methods, how quickly they learned to build redundancy, feedback loops, and flexible systems. The Academy itself seemed to shift in atmosphere. Curiosity replaced routine. Fear of failure was slowly being replaced by recognition that mistakes could be valuable. Even the older professors could not deny the truth. For the first time in generations, they admitted openly that the galaxy had underestimated humans. Not because of weapons or speed or raw intelligence, but because humans had evolved to survive environments and situations that no other species could endure. They could see patterns in failure, respond to unpredictability, and turn chaos into stability. Sam walked through the halls, observing quietly. Alien students stopped him occasionally, asking questions. Some were skeptical. Others were excited. "How does this work?" one asked. "Why does it survive?" "Because it can fail," Sam said simply. "Small failures, controlled failures. The system adapts. It learns from mistakes. That's all." Later, Professor Halloran approached him in the archive. "Sam," he said quietly, "I have studied every civilization in the galaxy. I have taught here for centuries. And yet, you have shown me that survival matters more than perfection. That is something no theory could predict." Sam smiled faintly. "I learned it on Earth. Life doesn't wait for perfect conditions. People don't survive by being perfect. They survive by adapting." Halloran nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it is time the galaxy learned the same lesson." That evening, as the Academy's artificial sun dimmed, the holographic simulation of the network glowed steadily. Nodes pulsed in soft, even light. The network had adapted to countless failures without collapsing. Stability had been achieved, not by perfect design, but by accepting imperfection and preparing for it. Sam leaned back in his chair, looking at the glowing projection. He thought about how simple the principle was. He thought about how the galaxy had searched for perfection for millennia, and how one human mind had shown the way in just a single class. The professors and students would debate this for decades, perhaps centuries. But the lesson was clear. Humans survived because they expected failure. Systems succeeded because they were designed to survive, not to avoid mistakes entirely. And in that quiet, steady glow of the simulation, the Academy, and the galaxy, finally understood what humans had always known. Survival mattered more than perfection. For the first time, the archives of the Academy would reflect that truth. And for the first time in generations, the galaxy realized that humans were exceptional not because they were stronger, faster, or smarter than other species, but because they could thrive in imperfection. It was a quiet understanding, yet a powerful one.